Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to present the update of the Certified ESG Analyst, the Seska 2021. We did some changes compared to the other programs. If you're familiar with the other programs, I would like to introduce what we changed, what we did new, and how the product looks like right now. The idea is that we focused on what is material for investment professionals from different angles, for analysts, for investment managers, but also for corporates. And so we focus on four different aspects especially. So we start with the general idea of ESG data. We saw in recent years that ESG data became more and more important, and that we also have an improvement of the quality of data. So the lack of availability and quality we saw in recent year really improved, and we would like to introduce you what happened in the perspective of data quality and data availability. Even if there still is a lack of quality, there's still, of course, space for improvement, and that's what we're going to tackle here as well. Another aspect we changed and we would like to give an overview is ESG reporting and ESG regulation. And also, especially in recent years, we saw a cooperation of different reporting standards, sometimes mergers of reporting standards, and especially important is a change in regulation we saw in recent years, especially in Europe. And if you just look at the last 2 to 3 years, what happened on a European level, we saw a change which we never imagined would have happened. And we will give you insights here to get the overview of what happened on an EU regulation basis. And we decided to have a dedicated module on regulation because there are so many things happening on a corporate level, but also on the level of financial institutions. And we think it's very important that you do have an understanding about the process, about the status quo, and also about the future development, what will happen there. In addition, we think that in the past, ESG was very much focused on, of course, equity, and in the last couple of years of bonds with green bonds, but there are also other asset classes out there we are addressing because the ESG topic is emerging in different asset classes, and that's why we have one chapter dedicated to asset classes as well. And last but not least, we also think that it's important to have a very clear understanding of a due diligence process. That means of the analysis of companies or other assets, and therefore we also decided to have different case studies on these issues. So we have an introduction of how analysis and evaluation works, and then we combine that in a special module called case studies. So what are the main advantages compared to we just heard that there are other programs out there, but what is the main advantage of the EFAS Certified ESG Analyst? So we decided to have a group of experts, both practitioners and academics, to develop a program that is based on academic knowledge we do have on ESG, but also on the implementation. So everything we're doing is a link between what do we really know from empirical research and how does it work in practice. This is something that we think is extremely important. We also included different nationalities in this program to develop the program and also to present the program, because ESG is an international issue, and Seska is also an international European organization. That's why we think this is very important. We also are addressing beginners, so those who are new in ESG, to give them a first step into the ESG from the perspective I just described, but also for advanced ESG users. We have a module especially dedicated to their needs, so if they do have an understanding of the basics, it's important to use that for valuation and the different modules we especially have after the beginning. I think what is important for you is that this is a 100% online program. So you can do everything online. We have exams both online and face-to-face, depending on where you are, but you're very flexible in using the program if you are taking the classes online, what we are doing here. I mentioned already that we have a lot of examples in there, and in addition we have 3 case studies on the valuation of companies, but also on portfolio management. And this portfolio management case study is new, and we think it's very important to not only have the part of analysis, but integrate that in your framework you're using in your daily work. As ESG topics are changing very rapidly, we decided to have regular updates. We did that in the past already, and we will still do that in the future. So we have usually an annual update of the program to integrate emerging topics, things that are changing, and this is something what we think makes the Seska special. You also get an international certificate, so we have more than 1,500 Seska holders globally. So we have a very high recognition of this program as well. And of course, this documents that there is a very high trust in the market based on what we did in the past. So what is the program structure? How does it look like? We start, of course, with an introduction on ESG integration. We will look at the ESG regulatory environment. I mentioned that already. So we put all the regulations together so that you get a very good and comprehensive overview of what is happening in the regulatory environment, both in Europe and internationally. We look at different ESG strategies, so how can you integrate ESG in your daily work. We will also look at different asset classes, that's what I mentioned before. And we think it's very important from the data perspective I mentioned before, that you also have an idea of what are the reporting requirements for companies. Because this is the information you have to work with. So the quality of information, the availability of information from a corporate perspective is extremely important. That's why we tackle that with an extra module, of course with a European orientation, but also the international aspects are mentioned and addressed here. So in chapter 6 to 9 are more focused on analysis. So 6 is on the general question, how can we integrate ESG in our analysis of companies? Then we go to the valuation, and the last 2 modules are dedicated to the case studies where we're working with the knowledge you achieved in analysis and valuation. So the general introduction of ESG and the integration in analysis. And we think after the years we are using and running this program, this has a very good fit to what is the need of practitioners in that field. So, and what are we addressing with these different chapters? First, the idea is that we need to reorientate the cash flows. So thrifting the trillions is something you can read if you look at the European reports or also national strategies, that this is an objective ESG investment is addressing. Also the idea of mainstreaming sustainability and addressing the risks that are out there as a second objective. And thirdly, just the transparency and the long-term orientation in asset management and investment is something we have to tackle. So then you can see how the different modules we are addressing, I presented here, are structured, and whom are we addressing? I mentioned that before. This is not only for institutional investors in asset management or rating provider and data provider. It's also for investment advisors, it's for banks, and of course also for corporates. This is important. So if you're in investor relations and you have to deal with ESG analysts or ESG investors, it's very important to have this knowledge of how are investment professionals thinking, how they're acting in that field. So to summarize that, we developed this so-called Seska Framework, where we incorporate the ESG factors into analysis and into valuation. So the idea is to address risk and return from different angles, to have a feeling of where are the risks, in which industries are the risks, how can we work with these risks. We're using different approaches to address that, and of course we also look at what is happening in the market, because there are changes in the market and sometimes it's difficult to anticipate what will come first, and what is the speed of these changes. So that's why we are addressing the whole landscape of ESG and what might happen there. From our perspective, it's not just the integration in analysis, it's the whole process, so the whole investment process chain. That's why we look at the different steps of the investment process chain to see where to integrate ESG, where we are advanced, where we still have to work on, and where it's right now not possible to integrate ESG. I have to admit that this is not the main part, so where it's not possible, so we try to find ways to integrate ESG. Okay, the last 2 points I mentioned already. So different asset classes and systematic valuation, and we think that this covers the world in this framework of ESG integration. This is a list of companies who are using the ESG training already. You can see it's very international, very European, and we think that we provide those companies with a very good knowledge on how to integrate ESG. So, thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you will participate in the program, that you enroll to the program, because the idea is not only to make a greener and a better world, but also to have the financial aspect in mind that if we integrate ESG, we can do both. We generate an impact, but we also have a market-conform risk-return profile. Thank you very much for your attention.